YouTube? Welcome back to another video. I wanted to talk today about bell materials, the kind of different ones that we have. I've probably talked about this in the past. We're going to do it again. And why or why not that matters at all. So, first I'm going to put this down. We're going to talk about yellow brass, everybody's favorite. It looks yellow. To the untrained eye, this looks like gold. Yellow gold, the stuff we use in jewelry, like all sorts of rings and things, is kind of this color. It's a little bit kind of brighter actually, but that's also called yellow gold. So if you ever get confused, yes, this does look gold. I've seen people go, oh, that's a gold brass colored instrument. It's yellow brass. And this one is easy to tell. It's clear lacquer, so the yellow brass color is coming straight out, even though it's got some acid bleed around the rim. This is still for sale, by the way, Kanstol 1570T. And the composition of yellow brass is, according to this random website that I pulled up, usually on instruments is about 70% copper, 30% zinc. So a lot of zinc, not a lot of copper comparatively to the other instruments. Yes, it is mostly copper, but there's a lot of zinc in there, and that's what gets the yellow color and not so much of that very kind of like red color that copper will have. So that's yellow brass. It's on a lot of instruments. Next one up the scale is gold brass. Now, this one's confusing because there are companies that call gold brass, and then there are other companies called rose brass, gold brass. This one is actual gold brass, quote unquote. I mean, it's all marketing terms, so it doesn't really count as like fact. But this is Bock gold brass. And this is different than other gold brass. This is 80% copper, 20% zinc. So a different makeup than yellow brass by a pretty significant amount, at least like 10% either direction. And we end up with the very kind of middle of the road color. I'm talking about just the color of the material itself, not the color that it makes. But that's Bock gold brass. This is super rare. Bock and Werrell, the Brazilian manufacturer, are the only companies that use this kind of gold brass. I think there might be some in Germany as well, occasionally, but this is pretty much it. 80-20 gold brass. Next one up is rose brass, and this is the one that's confusing because a lot of companies like to call this gold brass. In fact, this instrument is advertised as being gold brass, but it is in fact 85-15, so 85% copper, 15% zinc, rose brass, and it has it all the way through the valve section and everything, and the bell, of course, is rose brass. And this, of course, just has a little more copper, 5% in both directions. A little more copper, a little less zinc, and so it's a little bit closer to the final one that I have anyway. Red brass, which is 90-10. So this is 90% copper and 10% zinc. And of course there are copper bells that are just copper. There's some other stuff in there too, or else they'd be way too soft to kind of like form and use. They're all alloys. These are not exactly only copper and zinc. There's other stuff in there too. But that's the general gist of things. And so this is kind of the last step on the road, other than the occasional copper bell, but again, not a lot of those. And yeah, that's red brass. And of course we have nickel silver bells. We have silver bells, which are made a couple different ways, so they end up being completely different, even though they're made out of sterling silver, etc. And now, what is all this to say? And actually, I own, and I just tallied this up. Let me look. I own 2 bells in red brass. Hopefully one soon. I think someone's going to buy that Holton. 2 bells in Bock gold brass. I actually forgot. I have a 50 in gold brass now too. It's very exciting. I own 2 bells in rose brass. I have the Leish and something else that I just totally forgot. Oh, my King 608 is in rose brass as well. Those, you know, coming from totally different places. One is just like an American student horn, and one is the best contra money can buy. Pretty much the same material. And I own 9 trombone bells in yellow brass, as far as I can tell. And of course, I have my valved instruments too. I don't know what those are made out of. I think that like my Yamaha euphonium is actually gold brass. I don't know. It's silver plated, so you can't tell. All of this is to say, does that matter at all? I think a lot of people get hung up on, oh, I really love rose brass bells, or gold brass, or yellow brass, or silver bells, or whatever it is. And the thing that we can say about, and the point I'm trying to make here is, every specification does make a difference. I could, for instance, put a rubber thing on the end of this, and the horn is going to respond and play differently, and therefore end up sounding just a little bit different. Does that make a big difference, though? Not really. Does the bell make a difference? Absolutely. But is the difference of the material larger than someone different spinning the bell on a different day on a different mandrel? That's probably going to make more of a difference. It's really, really hard to generalize the difference that gold brass versus yellow brass makes when the bells are made in totally different places at totally different times. Maybe they're on different valve sections or different slides even. It's really hard to generalize what difference that little bit of copper content is going to make when all the other things are taken into account. I own this 42TG. I like it a lot. I think it sounds a little bit lighter. It's very tenory sound. It can get a little bit bright, as people would say. My teacher owns a 42TG. Same era, like early 2000s. His is unlacquered. That's about the only difference. His is dark. It is very dark. It's got a big, wide sound, very dark. You can play it super loud, and it kind of just sounds the same. It's a very good orchestral horn. And this doesn't sound anything like that, even though it might be like a few thousand serial numbers off. It's made in the same plant, ostensibly by similar people. It's made out of the same material. It's got the same valve on it, and they sound completely different. His former, he actually got stolen. He had a 42T with a yellow bell, and that was almost the same as his gold bell one that he owns now. They were not indistinguishable, but much closer than this one is to that instrument. So does that bell color really make a difference? In his case, he was literally just looking for another horn to replace it. He found it. He didn't really care what bell material it had, and it sounded a lot closer. Instead of searching out, oh no, I'm not going to get a gold brass one. That's not going to be the same. I've got to get yellow brass. It doesn't really matter. As for me, I don't really care. I want an instrument that works together as a unit rather than a specific kind of every material has to be just this. I'd rather an instrument just play really well and sound good than it be yellow brass. I don't care about that. I want it to be a good instrument before it has all the aspects that I like to look at. So don't get hung up on those little specs as much as you might think. If you play an instrument and you like it and you're like, well, I don't usually play red brass, that's okay. Something that I think is very interesting that I've heard like a dozen times now from both people at Edwards and Shires is that people will go in to get fitted for an instrument and they're like, oh, well, I play this now. Say it's exactly this. I play this right now, and I'm going to get a Shires that looks just like this, and it'll just be better, and I'll play that. And so they go in with a preconceived notion. Oh, I need a rose brass bell, and I want a Thayer, and probably this lead pipe, and probably this slide. And they go and play that, and they're like, yeah, that's pretty good. And the person fitting them will be like, how about we change this, and then change this, and change this. And what happens is a lot of these people end up on something that they never would have imagined, and they love it. It actually turns out that's what they needed instead. Not the preconceived notion they had in their head where they're like, I play yellow brass instruments with rotor valves. That doesn't really matter, does it? There are tiny little differences to be found in these instruments. My gold brass 50 bell sounds way different than any of my yellow brass bells, but again, is that down to the gold brass, or is that down to it being from the 80s and being kind of beat up and maybe having some work hardening and etc.? There's so many different factors to take into account other than that 5%, 10% difference in copper content in the bell. So keep your ears open, keep your eyes open, and don't get stuck to one idea of how a horn should look. That's it. Why?